What if I told you that the Canadian Football League should attempt to make another run at expansion into the United States? Stick with me through this one because I think it's got a very interesting component to it. Right now, the CFL has 9 teams, which is a very odd number to begin with. And there has been talk of expansion to a 10th city in Canada, particularly Halifax, Nova Scotia, which would be called the Halifax Schooners. However, they haven't gotten their stadium deal together yet. And so, even if expansion eventually does happen with Halifax, let's get serious here. Winning a league with 10 teams doesn't have the same cachet as winning a league with 32 teams like the NFL. And I think there are plenty of markets on the south of the 49th parallel that could support CFL football that can't support NFL football. These are places that would never ever in their wildest dreams have an NFL franchise because of lack of population or lack of market size or lack of really a lot of things. But I think this time, instead of doing what they did in 1993 and try to go well into the country, that CFL expansion had teams in Baltimore, San Antonio, Birmingham. This time I wouldn't go quite that far. I'm talking about cities that are really close to the 49th parallel, or maybe just south of it, or just south of the border, relatively speaking, that are large enough to definitely host Canadian Football League city franchises, but at the same time have no chance of ever hosting NFL franchises. And so, let's run through these cities here and see what you think. Let me know in the comments below if you think I'm way off base or if you think this is a viable possibility. So talk about those northern tier American cities that are very close to the Canadian border. Travel would not be very difficult other than the custom situations with crossing the border. But a lot of Canadian airports have pre-clearance. So at those Canadian airports, you can pre-clearance your way into the United States. And considering that CFL teams and NFL teams alike use charter flights, they would have their own planes and they would be able to pre-clear in Canada before taking off for the United States. And so they would be pre-cleared once they land south of the 49th parallel. These are mid-tier cities or mid-sized American markets. Again, not ever large. They would never, ever in anybody's wildest dreams host NFL franchises. Sorry, guys, not everybody can be Green Bay, Wisconsin. And if you know the history behind that one, you know that franchise has been around since the 1920s, at a time when the NFL wasn't necessarily in large American cities. NFL franchises have played in that era, played in places like Akron, Ohio, and such, and Duluth, Minnesota had an NFL franchise at one point, for example, in the same period in the 1920s, the Duluth Kellys. And out of this, you have the Green Bay Packers, and the Packers have been there ever since. They're a city-owned franchise, and for all intents and purposes, their market is the entire state of Wisconsin, which is a state of about 5.5 million people. As people travel from all the way across that state northeast to Green Bay, to Lambeau Field for their games. These would be Green Bay-sized markets, but they don't have the economic pull of an entire state for the most part. And if they do, those states are not large enough to host an NFL market anyway. So I'm going to go from west to east on this one. I'm going to start with the westernmost potential city for a CFL team, that is Spokane, Washington. Spokane has a metro population of around 700,000, and CFL stadiums can be as small as 20,000 seating. Now, some of them are not that small, such as in Winnipeg. I'll get back to them later. But Spokane at 700,000 is larger than many CFL markets, such as Saskatchewan. I'm going to come back to the Saskatchewan Roughriders repeatedly because that province only has 1.1 million residents, and it supports that team in Regina, Saskatchewan. And like the Packers, they're a province-wide team, and the name matches that market. Of course, Washington State has an NFL team on the other side in the form of the Seattle Seahawks. But Spokane can support its own CHL or CFL team. It has the market to do so. And so we're going to start with, and they don't have a Division I football stadium or program at this point. Gonzaga is the basketball program in Division I in Spokane. And so I don't think they have a stadium that could do it. Although on a temporary basis, Eastern Washington University, which is in nearby Cheney, Washington, is definitely big enough to be a temporary stadium until Spokane gets one of its own. So, and of course they have the red turf. So that's Spokane. Now we're going to go slightly south and east. We're going to go to Boise, Idaho. Boise has about the same population, about 700,000 in its metropolitan area. And they do have a very good, excellent, temporary, if not permanent, stadium available to them for a CFL franchise. Speaking of colored turf, of course, everybody knows that they have the Smurf turf, the blue turf at Boise State University. And that market can also, for TV purposes, support the CFL. But it would never have a chance in hell of hosting an NFL franchise. So that is Boise, Idaho. Going eastbound, I don't think any city in the state of Montana would qualify for a CFL franchise. Because I don't think any individual market is large enough there. The largest market in Montana is the Billings metropolitan area with less than 200,000 residents. And so I don't think that they would be very good for that purpose. Two of the college towns in Montana have stadiums that are big enough to host a CFL team, but I don't think those respectively have the markets and population for TV ratings either. Those being, of course, Missoula, home of the University of Montana, and Bozeman, home of Montana State University. Now, those two cities have very fine FCS, Division I football stadiums and programs as it stands, but they do not have the market size. Neither one of them is, they're both barely over 100,000 residents in their metro area. So that no market in Montana is going to be big enough to work, and don't even get me started on Great Falls. Moving east from there, we're going to go into the Dakotas. This is where it gets fun. Sioux Falls, South Dakota, population of around 300,000 residents, has a very immense regional pull. And I think they would be a very fine choice. A temporary stadium could be the South Dakota State Stadium, which is about 50 miles north in Brookings, South Dakota. But I think Sioux Falls Metro has about 300,000 TV market. You can probably double that. So I think they can pull in enough fans, and it'll also likewise be a statewide team, because I don't think any other market in South Dakota is large enough to host a CFL team. This brings us to North Dakota, which is almost an identical situation, except instead of the city of Sioux Falls, you have the city of Fargo. Fargo-Moorhead market right now is about 275,000 residents. And again, as far as TV markets, it is the 100th largest TV market in the country, because the Fargo-Moorhead TV market also includes Grand Forks, which is another city of about 100,000 just an hour north of Fargo. And the same TV stations serve both cities. Also includes a large swath of western Minnesota. And this would also be a regional team with a regional pull. The present stadium in Fargo, of course, is North Dakota State University's Fargo Dome, which can seat a little over 21,000 and is basically the loudest stadium in FCS college football. And of course, the Bison have a big hand in that because all they do is win. they will support a winner left and right. College, to the point where College Game Day has visited Fargo twice. And their record against higher level football bowl subdivision competition is astounding. So yes, the CFL could put a team in Fargo and it would do very well. Moving into Minnesota, there's only one city that really would have a chance, and it's kind of a stretch. And as I mentioned, Duluth had an NFL team in the 1920s. You could figuratively put a CFL team there. It would require a brand new stadium, because I don't think University of Minnesota Duluth has a large enough stadium to house a professional football franchise of any kind. So this one would require a brand new stadium outright. And so I think Duluth could do it. They have a market population of about 300,000. It's not much of a regional pull, though, unlike the Dakota teams. So a CFL team could figuratively make it in Duluth, but I think barely. Moving over to Wisconsin. Of course, we've already got the Packers in Green Bay, so they're not in the picture. Green Bay is the NFL franchise there, and they basically suck the oxygen out of the entire state. College football, the Badgers in Madison do the same. So while Madison could theoretically be a large enough of a market to house a CFL team, I think the Packers and the Badgers suck too much of the oxygen out of the rest of the state in order for that one to even be a possibility. So Wisconsin would not be able to get a team. I'm going to go westbound real quick, and I'm going to go into Iowa, and I think there's a fabulous potential market in Iowa, of course, that being Des Moines. Des Moines, metropolitan population of 600,000, and it could also, like the Dakotas, be a statewide franchise. And I think the CFL brand of football, I think, would play very well there, considering that it once did host one of the most successful Arena Football League franchises in forms of the Iowa Barnstormers, which produced Kurt Warner. And so people there are used to that style of spread high-speed football. And so I don't think it'd be a very tough adaptation in Des Moines with a new CFL squad. Now for half a minute there, I want to go backtrack about an hour or two west of Des Moines, and I want to bring in Omaha to the discussion. And the reason why I will nominate Omaha for this particular conversation is because I think they could actually be an NFL city on one condition, and that is that the stadium is bought and paid for by one Warren Buffett. One man worth tens of billions of dollars. $1 billion stadium for him is basically pocket change to him. Buffett always said that he always likes to invest in businesses that he knows about and knows how they make money. Well, in the NFL, it's public information how they make their money. And would the NFL refuse a Buffett-paid stadium? Hell to the no. This is a league that, if you come cap in hand, willing to finance a stadium, whether it be publicly or privately, they will give you a team. The only problem is convincing the Oracle of Omaha to build a stadium in Omaha, which of course has a metropolitan market of right at 1 million residents. Just outside of range of an NFL market. And I think the folks in Kansas City with the Chiefs would have something to say about this one. But because Omaha is technically part of the Kansas City NFL market at this point, and they would not go down without a fight. Much like Jerry Jones in Dallas has much control over the state of Texas, and he fought bitterly to keep the Houston Texans from ever being founded under the same lines, and why he will fight tooth and nail to ever prevent an NFL team from being put in San Antonio or Austin. But coming back to Omaha, I think that one should be reserved for the NFL. So that will just realistically not happen. Now let's go back the other direction again. Let's go past Wisconsin Michigan. Michigan has one stellar candidate for CFL franchise. Want to take a guess at what it is? It's not anywhere close to Detroit. We're going all the way to the western half of the state. We're talking about the metropolitan area of Grand Rapids. Population just over 1 million residents, with excellent air connections as it stands, and a very good airport in the form of Gerald R. Ford International Airport, and a market of 1 million people, and no shortage of corporate sponsors in this city that could help get a team off the ground. This one I think would also require a brand new stadium to start with, but if you want a temporary home for a Grand Rapids CFL team, I think it could be placed 50 miles south at the the Western Michigan Broncos Waldo Stadium in Kalamazoo. Itself a city, a metro market of about 400,000 residents, which could be part of a Grand Rapids CFL market eventually. But Waldo is definitely big enough for a CFL franchise at this point. I think we're talking about 30,000 capacity. Let me look that up. I didn't look it up before I filmed this, but Michigan, Grand Rapids is the answer to that particular question. Let's move southwest and southeast real quick. Indiana, of course, has the Indianapolis Colts, so they're out of the question. The one mid-sized city I can think of that could possibly house a CFL franchise is Fort Wayne. Of course, we're being way up on the northeastern corner of the state, with a metropolitan population of right about 500,000. Would never get an NFL franchise, although I once had one. But Fort Wayne as a CFL city I think would be an excellent choice. A TV market that is strong enough, and if they can figure out the stadium question, I think they would work. They do not have anything that would be close to sufficient at this point. Now sneak east into Ohio. Columbus is an interesting case, but I don't think the CFL would work there because Ohio State sucks all the oxygen out of that market. Cleveland, of course, has the Browns, and Cincinnati, of course, has the Bengals. There really only leaves one population center left in the state of Ohio that would be large enough to fit the criteria of this, and that is Toledo. A lot of people in Toledo aren't necessarily tied towards any of the NFL franchises per se, but if they had a team of their own in the CFL, I think it could work. And the Toledo Rockets, of course, being a mid-major football team at this point, I think their stadium could be a good permanent home, if not a temporary one, for a CFL franchise. So as far as I'm concerned, Toledo is in. Sneak a little further east. Pennsylvania. There are no correct answers on this one. Pittsburgh, of course, has the Steelers. Philadelphia, of course, has the Eagles. And State College in the center of the state has Penn State. And the Nittany Lions, again, suck all the fan base oxygen out of the rest of the state that the Steelers and the Eagles don't already control. And I don't think Erie is particularly large enough to meet the criteria. It's a declining market of about 250,000 residents. And I think if you have a declining population, I don't think you really should be in the conversation for a professional sports team. Or at least a new one. Now, if you're the Buffalo Bills and you already have one, and you're still large enough to support a squad, even though your metro area is in decline, even though in their case it's a slow decline, it's more of a dripping out of flow. Different story. But speaking of New York State, this brings two markets into my picture. For CFL franchises, that markets that have 750,000 and about 1.1 million respectively, that I think would do very well in this area. The first one is Syracuse, and the second one is Rochester. I don't think Syracuse football in the collegiate level has the pull that, say, Penn State does in Pennsylvania. You take a metro area of 750,000, with the Syracuse Orangemen being their only big-time team of any kind. I think there's enough room left for a CFL franchise to step in. Again, temporary home of the Orangemen Stadium, or possibly a permanent one. Rochester's a little more complicated because they don't have a college team of any kind at this point, so they would need to build their stadium from scratch. And again, it's a city that's a little bit on the decline, but at 1.1 million residents, it still has enough of a market mass to pull it off at this point. So, in my guesstimation, Rochester is in. Now, moving east from there, we're moving into New England. Connecticut. Here's a fun one. Hartford. You could even call them the Hartford Whalers. Steal the name from the hockey franchise that left them for North Carolina back in the day. A CHL team called the Hartford Whalers. It could work because Hartford has a metropolitan population of about 800,000 residents, but like some of the others, it would be a statewide franchise, just like the Whalers were. Of course, you have other mid-major metropolitan markets in the state of Connecticut, such as New Haven, such as Bridgeport, and even Stamford, closer to New York City. A state with a population of around 5 million residents between all of its markets combined. I think Hartford works in this equation. Let's move a little bit further north. I think we've got one in Massachusetts that just misses. And that market is Springfield. And Springfield has its problems. And being a mid-major market of about 700,000 residents, I don't think there's enough capital there to build a stadium or make anything work there, or have enough corporate sponsorship money to make it a go. So I don't think you have a team anywhere in Massachusetts. They already have the big NFL franchise, of course, in the Patriots. So I don't think that one works. But one nearby in New England that might work, head on south to Rhode Island, guys. Buckle up. A CFL franchise in Providence. Providence has a little bit of corporate money. Again, the stadium question, there's not any existing facility that could even temporarily house them. So that one would have to be a solution. But the stadium requirements, again, for CFL franchise are not nearly as enormous as they are for NFL ones. I think it could scrounge together something that would seat 20 to 30,000. I think there's just enough money there and just enough population. Population in Rhode Island, I think, is largely stable at this point. The Providence market pretty much is the entire state. In case you haven't already figured it out, you can drive from one side of Rhode Island to the other in about 45 minutes. It's all the Providence metropolitan area. So the entire state is the Providence market. Population 1.1 million. And I think this one flies. With the smaller requirements of the CFL versus the mega requirements of the NFL. Interesting trivia question, though. The NFL was rumored to move to, before Robert Kraft bought the Patriots, there were rumors around of moving the Patriots to Providence and building a new stadium there. So if Rhode Island was in the conversation to put up stadium money for the Patriots, their ability to do it for a CFL franchise is unquestioned. Now we're going to go east from those states. Vermont, absolutely not. There's no place in Vermont large enough to host any sort of professional sporting event. Burlington is the largest city, the largest metropolitan area with a population of about 170,000. There's no big corporate money there. Sorry, Ben and Jerry, you don't count. And so that's out of the question. New Hampshire has one that comes close. And I would put Manchester and Nashua as the same market because they're practically neighbors. In Hillsborough County, New Hampshire, population 350,000. It's just outside of the range. I mean, as far as TV market goes, you've got the entire state, and the entire state has a population of about a little over 1 million residents. Problem is, though, pulling in fans from the rest of the state into Manchester/Nashua, the road network doesn't really support that, and there's such remote areas in northern New Hampshire that just don't support this. So I think Manchester is just too small. Going to the easternmost state of the entire collection, and that's Maine. Obvious candidate here, and that's Portland. The Portland market is about 600,000 residents. There are no stadiums at this point, but I don't think conjuring enough money for the CFL stadium requirements is going to be very difficult. And Portland is not a real growth metropolis, but it's hardly shrinking either. You know, it's peaceful, it's quiet, but there is some strength to it economically. And so I would put Portland, and it's 600,000 residents, and again, a statewide team would be in Portland because there is no other market there that even comes close to these qualifications. So a CFL team in Portland, I think, would do quite fine. That's it for American expansion. Of course, if you go east from Maine, you're going into Halifax, Nova Scotia, again, as I mentioned at the top of the video. And I don't think any market in New Brunswick, which is the province between Maine and Nova Scotia, meets the qualifications enlisted. The largest city up there is Moncton, with about 150,000 residents, so I don't think you got any infield teams. Divisions could be developed along potential geographical rivalries. A CFL division with both Syracuse and Rochester in it, for example, I think it'd be really fun to watch. A rivalry, CFL international rivalry between Fargo and Winnipeg, which actually, if in history, the Northern League of Independent Baseball in the 90s and 2000s had a very intense rivalry between Winnipeg and Fargo. The Winnipeg Goldeyes and the Fargo Moorhead Redhawks had a rivalry so intense that their respective managers once dressed up in mascot uniforms just to fight each other on the infield in Fargo. So after this, they both got thrown out of the game for a second time and fined accordingly. That kind of rivalry, I think, would be really, really funny to watch. So would a rivalry in a division with, say, Boise and Spokane would be a fun one to watch. Or even involving Des Moines and Duluth. And I think you could create out of this some combination of these cities. Obviously not all of them would make it, but I think you could eventually get to a 16-team league, which for scheduling purposes would be much easier. And again, traveling from this part of the United States to mainland Canada would be very, very easy to do. And I'm not going to lie, getting players to play in the United States for American dollars with American revenues would just be the icing on the cake. Unfortunately, the problem is that the American franchises would be at a tremendous advantage because of currency rates versus their Canadian counterparts. But that has been worked through with the NHL, and it still is at the present. Because there are 6 Canadian NHL franchises at this point, with the rest of them in the United States. So this would be a similar setup. So there you have it. My candidates for Canadian Football League expansion into the United States. It's not going to be 1993 all over again. This is a very different proposition. These are cities that are almost Canadian. Some of them are close enough that they might as well be Canadian. So that's my crazy idea for the night. You folks enjoy. I'll keep coming up with crazy ideas. Hopefully some of you will keep watching. If you like that and have any other suggestions, the comment section is open. Drop your comment and please like the video and share for more crazy stories of What If I Told You. Peace out, homies.